A normal morning at the hospital suddenly turns into something no one could have seen coming. A pregnant woman rushes in, and what unfolds next leaves the entire staff speechless. What happened behind the delivery room doors? And why are doctors still talking about it? Watch till the end to uncover the full story. If you love gripping real-life stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. More amazing content is on the way. The morning had begun like any other inside St. Helena General Hospital. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above, nurses moved in practiced patterns, and the sterile scent of antiseptic clung to every surface. Outside, the city stirred to life beneath a pale sky. Inside, order reigned, until the glass doors of the emergency ward burst open with a thunderous crash. A pregnant woman stumbled inside, barefoot, clutching her massive belly as though trying to hold her body together. Her hospital gown flapped open at the back, and sweat poured down her pale face in steady streams. Her cries cut through the air like a blade. "Please, help me! The baby! It's coming!" she gasped, then cried out again as another contraction seized her body. Heads turned. A paramedic spilled his coffee. Time seemed to pause. Dr. Leandro had only just entered the hospital himself. His backpack still slung over one shoulder, hair damp from the morning fog. He stopped in his tracks at the sight of the woman collapsing onto her knees. "Mara?" he whispered without realizing. He had seen her name flash on the ER schedule earlier that week, a late-term pregnancy without prenatal care. He hadn't expected her to arrive like this. "Get a stretcher, now," he barked. Nurse Katia reacted first, heels clicking down the hallway as she sprinted to grab the gurney. In seconds, she was back, maneuvering it around waiting chairs and IV stands. Leandro crouched beside the woman. "I've got you. You're safe. What's your name?" "Mara," she panted. "Please. It hurts. I can't." "You can. You will. We've got you," he said as he helped lift her onto the stretcher with Katia's assistance. Mara's legs were trembling. Clear fluid trailed behind her on the polished floor. Her water had already broken. She groaned deeply, her face contorting in pain as her fingers clawed at her belly. "She's close," Katia said. "If we don't move, she'll deliver in the lobby." They started pushing the stretcher down the corridor, feet moving in frantic rhythm. Other patients watched with wide eyes. A doctor and a nurse rushing a woman into labor, nothing unusual in this place, until everything changed. Just past the nurse's station, the stretcher stopped cold with a jolt. "What the hell?" Leandro muttered, frowning. He bent to check the wheels and froze. There, beneath the frame of the stretcher, was a dog. A large black Labrador with sleek fur and intense eyes. Its teeth were clamped tightly onto the stretcher's metal leg, and it growled low in its throat. It wasn't barking or lunging, it was simply refusing to let go. "What the? How did it get in?" Katia gasped. Leandro stood slowly. "Hey, buddy, we need to get through. Come on, let go." He reached towards the dog gently, but the growl deepened, sharp and guttural. Hospital staff began to gather. A security guard jogged down the hallway, radio crackling. Patients peered out of their rooms. The tension in the air thickened. "Is that her dog?" someone asked. The question was soon answered. Mara, writhing on the stretcher, opened her eyes and rasped, "But bro..." At the sound of her voice, the dog's ears perked. He released the stretcher and stepped back, but didn't leave. He sat still, alert, guarding. "You've got to be kidding me," Leandro muttered, shaken, but there was no time to dwell. He gave the stretcher a push. It rolled forward again, down the hall, through the double doors, into the delivery room. "Gloves," he ordered. Within seconds, a small team assembled. bright lights overhead flickered on. The room filled with movement and beeping monitors. Leandro pulled on his gloves. Katia helped position Mara, wiping her forehead with a cold cloth. "How far along are you?" he asked, trying to keep calm. Mara gasped. 9 months, I think, twins. Any ultrasounds? She shook her head weakly. Wanted surprise. Leandro and Katia exchanged a look. A twin pregnancy without scans was risky, too risky. He pressed gently on her abdomen. The contractions were strong, too strong for someone not fully dilated. "Okay, Mara. We're going to need you to breathe with us. Stay with me." Mara whimpered. "They're coming." Her body arched as another contraction ripped through her. Katia grabbed her hand. "You've got this. Just breathe." Outside the room, the black dog sat in front of the delivery room doors. Security tried coaxing him away with food and commands. He refused to move. Back inside, Leandro was losing patience. "She's not dilated enough," he said under his breath. "But these contractions—" Another groan tore from Mara's throat. She turned her head toward the door. "Bro," she whispered. As if hearing her, the dog outside let out a deep bark. Mara's eyes rolled back. She convulsed, then shouted. It was not a scream of fear nor pain. It was force, primal, raw, and it was followed by the wet cry of a newborn. Leandro leaned in, catching the first baby with steady hands. He checked the airway, heart rate, then he looked at the child's face and froze. He didn't speak, didn't breathe, just stared. Katia stepped in quickly, taking the infant from him. Leandro stumbled back and sat on the floor, hand pressed to his mouth. "What is it?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. She looked down at the baby in her arms. A small boy, healthy weight, strong lungs, but covered in a fine coat of dark hair, not just on the head, but on the cheeks, arms, back, a faint sheen over the entire body. "Hypertrichosis," she whispered, heart pounding. Mara's breathing had steadied. Her eyes fluttered open. "Is he okay?" she asked. Katia swallowed hard. "He's beautiful." Another cry interrupted the silence. The second child was coming. This one slid into the doctor's hands with ease. A girl, tiny, red, perfect. Leandro blinked, as if waking from a dream. He checked her vitals. Everything normal. 2 healthy babies, he said finally, his voice hoarse. Mara was pale but smiling. "I want to see them." Katia brought the boy first, laid him on her chest, then the girl. Mara looked between them. "They're mine," she whispered. "Both of them." A soft bark echoed from the hallway. Bro was still waiting, still watching. Later, when the commotion had settled, a nurse would remark how the dog never tried to enter. He just sat there, like he knew his job was to guard from outside. And, though the birth was over, no one could forget what they'd seen. No one could explain why a woman with no scans, a missing partner, and a dog by her side had walked into their hospital and given birth to something that felt almost too mysterious to be ordinary. But the babies were real, breathing, warm, alive, and that, for the moment, was enough. 2 years earlier, everything had been different. Mara and Joel had once been the kind of couple others envied, affectionate, playful, full of shared plans and whispered dreams. Their relationship, though not without flaws, had always felt anchored in love. They spent lazy Sundays wrapped in each other's arms, laughing about nothing, imagining the future. A house, a child, a life that stretched wide and warm before them. But, as time moved on, reality crept in, the intensity faded. Long work hours turned conversations into silence, kisses into routine gestures, intimacy into distance. The warmth remained, buried deep, but a chill had settled in its place. In a desperate attempt to rekindle their bond, they agreed. It was time to have a baby. It became their shared mission, their new hope. They threw themselves into the process with optimism, tracking calendars, taking supplements, counting fertile windows. Every negative test was a blow, but they pressed on, convincing themselves the next one would be different. When nothing changed after months of trying, they sought help. Blood tests, hormone panels, endless waiting rooms. And then, one cold Wednesday afternoon, the doctor delivered a truth neither of them was ready for. Joel was sterile. The room fell silent. Joel stared at the wall as if the words hadn't registered. Mara blinked rapidly, her face unreadable. "It's not uncommon," the doctor continued gently. "It's likely a result of long-term anabolic steroid use." Joel felt as if the air had been punched from his lungs. His mind reeled back through years of bodybuilding, of chasing perfection in the mirror, of ignoring every warning label and health concern in the pursuit of the ideal physique. He had sculpted his body like a statue. Now he sat there, chiseled and broken. Mara said nothing. On the way home, they didn't speak. Joel gripped the wheel. Mara looked out the window. Her silence wasn't icy. It was distant, unreachable. In the weeks that followed, they drifted further. Joel was haunted by guilt. He looked in the mirror and saw a fraud, a man who had traded his future for vanity. He tried to reach out, but Mara was slipping away, gracefully, silently. She smiled when he came home, but it didn't reach her eyes. She cooked dinner, but only for one. She lay in bed beside him, but felt miles away. The quiet between them became unbearable. One evening, as Joel watched television in the living room, Mara stepped outside for air. She returned an hour later with something bundled in a blanket. A puppy, black fur, big brown eyes, floppy ears that perked when he saw Joel. "What's that?" Joel asked, narrowing his eyes. Mara sat on the floor and unwrapped the bundle. "This is Bro," she said softly. "I adopted him." "A dog?" Joel's voice rose. "Are you serious?" She didn't flinch. "I needed something to hold on to." Joel scoffed, throwing his hands up. "So now I have to compete with a dog?" "You haven't touched me in months," she said, her voice calm. "You barely look at me. I come home to silence. I go to bed alone even when you're beside me." Joel's jaw tightened. "And your solution is to bring in a mutt?" "My solution is to stop feeling like I'm disappearing," she snapped. "And Bro doesn't care about my fertility or yours. He just shows up." That night, Joel slept on the couch. Mara curled up in bed with Bro at her feet. She listened to the dog's steady breathing and felt, for the first time in a long time, like she wasn't entirely alone. Over the next few weeks, Bro became her shadow. He followed her from room to room, lay beside her during meals, nudged her hand when she cried. Mara found herself talking to him, confiding things she couldn't say to Joel. She read books about dog psychology, watched videos on advanced training. At first, it was just basic commands: sit, stay, heel. But Bro was unusually responsive. He learned fast. He picked up on her tone, her mood, her movements. One afternoon, lying on the grass in their backyard, Mara howled jokingly at the sky. Bro perked up, tilted his head, then let out a soft, echoing howl. Mara blinked, surprised. She did it again, longer this time. Bro responded with a deeper sound. It became a game between them, a secret language. She used short barks to ask him to drop things, low growls to get his attention. Bro obeyed with uncanny precision. Joel watched it all from a distance. His resentment simmered. One evening, he came home early from the gym and stood frozen at the back door. In the yard, Mara was on all fours, barking softly while Bro danced around her, tail wagging. She laughed. A real laugh, not the tight smile he'd grown used to. Joel stepped outside. "What the hell is going on?" Mara stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. "I'm teaching him new commands." "By barking like a dog?" His tone was disgusted. "You're losing it." "It's just a game," she said, "but it works. Watch." She pointed at Bro, who had picked up a slipper. She gave a sharp bark. Bro dropped it immediately. Joel shook his head. "This is insane." "No," she said. "What's insane is pretending we're still a couple when we barely speak. What's insane is acting like I don't exist while you drown yourself in protein powder and mirror selfies." The argument escalated. Harsh words, old wounds. Joel accused her of replacing him. She accused him of vanishing long before the dog arrived. "You think I don't regret it?" Joel finally yelled. "You think I don't replay that doctor's words every damn day? I ruined everything, I know that." Mara's face softened for a second, but then she turned away. "I didn't want a dog instead of you," she said, "but he came when I needed someone, and you didn't." That night, Joel packed a bag, threw clothes into a duffel without folding them. Mara sat on the couch, unmoving, Bro's head in her lap. At the door, Joel hesitated. "This isn't working. We both know it." She looked at him, her eyes were tired but calm. "We used to be so good." "We were," he agreed. "Let's try one more time." He didn't move. "I still love you," she whispered. Joel dropped the bag. Later that night, they lay together in bed, touching for the first time in what felt like years. There were no promises, no grand declarations, just warmth, contact, hope. A week later, Mara began feeling ill. Dizziness, nausea, the smell of coffee made her gag. Joel noticed. "Maybe you caught something from the dog," he muttered. But deep down, Mara knew it was something else. She bought a pregnancy test. When the result showed positive, her knees buckled. She gripped the sink for support. "This isn't possible," she thought. "Joel is sterile. It must be a mistake." She took another, then another, all positive. Her mind raced. Could it have been a misdiagnosis? A miracle? She didn't tell Joel right away. Instead, she planned a surprise. She bought a pair of tiny white baby shoes, cleaned the dining room, cooked his favorite meal. She wrote, "I'm pregnant," across her belly in red lipstick. When Joel got home, he was confused by the setup. "What's this?" "Lift the lid," she said, gesturing to the tray on the table. He did, saw the shoes, then looked up. Mara lifted her shirt. Joel's face drained of color. You're pregnant?" She nodded, eyes brimming with tears. "It's real. But how?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe it's a gift." Joel didn't speak for a long moment. Then he walked to her, dropped to his knees, and pressed his forehead to her belly. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." From the hallway, Bro peeked around the corner, tail swishing slowly, watching them silently. Mara reached out and beckoned him in. For once, Joel didn't stop the dog. That night, they sat together, man, woman, and dog, tied by something fragile and strangely strong. They didn't yet know that peace would not last, that doubt would return, that the bond they had barely begun to mend would soon be tested again. But in that moment, it was enough. The following weeks were some of the most peaceful Joel and Mara had experienced in years. There was laughter in the house again, soft conversations late at night, hands brushing against each other as they stood over the stove or folded laundry together. Mara's pregnancy became the center of their world. Joel hovered around her protectively, his excitement quiet but constant. Every evening, he would kiss her belly goodnight, whispering to the baby inside. And every morning, Mara would find Bro curled up on the rug beside the bed, his eyes following her every move. He didn't bark or beg for attention. He simply stayed close, a shadow with a heartbeat. They painted the nursery together, soft colors, neutral tones. Joel assembled the crib, Mara folded tiny onesies. They didn't know the gender yet. Mara had refused any scans. She wanted the birth to be a surprise, a miracle fully revealed only at the end. Joel was hesitant but agreed, trusting her judgment. After all, this whole pregnancy already felt like something out of a dream. But as the months passed, his unease began to grow. Mara's belly swelled faster than expected. By the 6th month, she looked ready to deliver. Her back ached constantly, and her skin stretched taut across her abdomen. Even her doctor seemed puzzled during checkups, suggesting she might be carrying twins. Mara shrugged it off. She didn't want to know. She wanted to believe the baby, or babies, would come when they were ready, and that until then, she didn't need to worry. Joel tried to keep calm, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. He didn't voice his concerns at first. He didn't want to ruin what they had managed to rebuild. But doubt is a quiet poison. It slips into thoughts when you least expect it, and before long, it takes root. Bro didn't help. The dog had grown fiercely protective of Mara. He followed her from room to room, growled whenever Joel got too close, and often slept with his head resting on her stomach. Joel began to feel like a stranger in his own home. Every time he tried to touch her, Bro would sit up, ears alert, eyes narrowed. Joel laughed it off the first few times, joking that the dog thought he was competition. But after a while, the tension became unbearable. One night, Joel entered the living room to find Mara lying on the couch, her belly exposed. Bro sat beside her, licking the curve of her stomach with gentle, rhythmic strokes. Mara's eyes were closed. She was humming softly, almost as if in a trance. Joel froze. "Mara," he said. She opened her eyes, startled, and quickly pulled down her shirt. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Nothing," she said. "He was just being sweet. He was licking your stomach." "It soothes me," she said, defensive. "It feels calming." Joel's stomach twisted. He didn't say what he was thinking. He didn't know how to put it into words. Something about the moment felt wrong. Off. But he didn't want to accuse. Not yet. The next morning, he brought it up again, gently. "I think we should go in for an ultrasound," he said over breakfast. Mara looked up from her bowl of fruit. "Why?" "Just to be sure everything's okay. You're bigger than normal, and the doctor said—" "I don't want to," she interrupted. "I've made up my mind." Joel exhaled slowly. "But don't you want to know if it's twins? Or if there's something—" "No," she said firmly. "I don't. This is our miracle. I don't want to dissect it. I just want to experience it." He didn't push. He didn't want to fight. But the fear grew. The more Joel watched her, the more he noticed things he couldn't explain. The way she would sometimes sit silently in the garden with Bro, neither moving, both staring at the sky. The way she barked short commands that the dog obeyed with military precision. Once, late at night, he woke to hear her murmuring in low, guttural tones, almost like growling. When he entered the room, she stopped and looked at him blankly. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Just talking to Bro." Joel returned to bed, but didn't sleep. The doubts circled endlessly in his mind. He tried to remind himself that pregnancy was emotional. hormonal, that maybe Mara was simply bonding with the dog in a maternal way. But even that didn't explain why Bro had started growling at him every time he approached Mara's belly. Joel's fear became suspicion. What if the child wasn't his? He hated himself for thinking it, but the thought refused to die. He remembered the diagnosis. He remembered the doctor's voice, the tests, the confirmation. He remembered the years of nothing. No pregnancy, no hope. And then suddenly, after one night of reconciliation, Mara was pregnant? Could it be possible? Could the diagnosis have been wrong? Or was it something else? One evening, as they sat on the couch watching TV, Joel finally broke. "Mara," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something." She looked at him, sensing the weight in his tone. "Is this baby mine?" The room went silent. Mara stared at him, her expression frozen. Then, slowly, it shifted. Shock, confusion, and then, unmistakably, fury. "How dare you?" she whispered. Joel swallowed. I need to know." "After everything," she said, voice trembling, "after everything we've been through, after we finally found our way back to each other, you ask me that? Look at your belly, Mara. It's enormous. You refuse an ultrasound. And that dog, he's always between us, always watching. You talk to him more than to me. You bark at him and he listens. He licks your stomach. He growls when I touch you." "You think I cheated on you?" she shouted, her voice rising. "With who, Joel? I don't leave the house. I'm with you every day." "I don't know," he snapped. "I don't know what to think anymore." Mara stood up, breathing hard, holding her belly as if to protect it. "You want to know what I think?" she said. "I think you're scared. I think you're so ashamed of what you did to your body that you can't believe something good could come from you." Joel stared at her, stunned. Tears welled in her eyes. "I have done everything to forgive you," she said, "everything. And you still don't trust me." He took a step toward her. "Don't," she warned. "Just don't." He stepped back. "I'm going to the gym," he muttered. "I need air." She didn't respond. He grabbed his keys, slammed the door, and left. The house was silent. Bro stood at the top of the stairs, watching Mara. She sank into the couch, shaken. Then she felt it. A sharp cramp. Then another. She stood slowly, but something warm ran down her legs. Her water had broken. Panic rose in her throat. She looked around for her phone, but it wasn't in sight. Her breathing grew shallow. She tried calling out, but no one answered. Then she turned to Bro. "Bro," she gasped. "Keys, please." The dog ran to the hallway shelf, jumped up, and knocked down the keychain. He grabbed it in his mouth and brought it to her. With effort, Mara staggered toward the car, clutching her stomach. Bro climbed into the passenger seat. She started the engine, her vision blurring. As the car sped down the street toward the hospital, contractions tearing through her, Bro sat silently beside her, his eyes locked on the road ahead. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just watched. He knew. She didn't know how, but he knew. And she prayed, through the pain, through the fear, that Joel would come. That somehow, despite everything, he would know too. But Joel was still in the gym, pounding out reps, sweat dripping from his forehead, rage in his chest. He didn't know that his world was about to change. That a dog was already running through the city streets, chasing his scent. And that the woman he loved was moments away from delivering the only thing that could save them. The emergency room lights flickered slightly as Mara's stretcher burst through the hallway, pushed by Nurse Katia and guided by Dr. Leandro. The delivery team was already prepping inside, alerted by the urgency of the call. Mara's contractions came like crashing waves, one after another, pulling her deeper into exhaustion. Her face was pale, her knuckles white as she clutched the side rails of the stretcher. The moment they entered the delivery room, Katia helped her onto the bed while Dr. Leandro began checking vital signs. Monitors beeped around them, sterile instruments gleamed under surgical lights, and Mara's breathing grew more erratic. "She's fully dilated," Leandro said, glancing at the monitor. "It's happening now. Let's move." Katia moved to Mara's side and held her hand tightly. "You're doing great, Mara. We've got you." Outside the room, Bro sat silently in front of the delivery doors, his body still and tense like a sentry. He had followed the stretcher all the way to the delivery wing and settled there, ignoring the shouts and commands of security trying to remove him. One guard tried offering a piece of meat from the cafeteria. Bro didn't blink. Another reached out to touch his collar, and the dog growled so low it made the man step back immediately. Eventually, they gave up. The dog wasn't moving. Inside, Mara screamed, her voice raw, filled with desperation. Katia wiped the sweat from her forehead, whispering encouragement. Leandro was focused, brows furrowed, gloved hands ready. First baby was crowning. "One more push," he said. Mara cried out, teeth gritted, muscles shaken, and gave everything she had. Then, silence. A second later, a cry broke through the room, loud and piercing. Leandro held the infant up. A boy. Healthy weight, strong heartbeat. But as he turned the baby, his eyes widened. The child's skin was covered in a fine coat of hair. Not just on the head, but across the back, shoulders, and cheeks. Not thick like fur, but enough to shock. Leandro stared for a moment, frozen. "Hypertrichosis," he muttered under his breath. "What?" Katia asked. "Rare condition, likely hormonal," he said quickly. "He's breathing well. Let's clean him up." Katia took the baby and wrapped him in a warm blanket, her hands trembling slightly. Mara looked up weakly, her eyes glazed with pain, but searching. "Is he okay?" she asked. "He's beautiful," Katia replied, forcing a smile. Mara smiled back faintly before her body was racked with another contraction. "She's not done," Leandro said. "Second one is coming." The team moved swiftly. A nurse adjusted the lights while another repositioned the instruments. Mara groaned again, arching her back. "You're doing great," Katia said. "One more." A final push and another cry filled the room. A second baby, a girl this time. She was smaller than her brother, but her skin was smooth, her features delicate. Leandro quickly checked her vitals. "Perfect," he said. "Healthy baby girl." He looked between the two infants, then at Mara. "Twins," he said. "You were right." Mara lay still, eyes closed, a single tear slipping down her cheek. Joel was not there. She had hoped he would be. Even in the chaos, her mind reached for him, for the sound of his voice, the feel of his hand in hers. Outside, Bro suddenly stood, his ears perked up, his body stiffened like he heard something no one else could. A sound, a call, a command. Then he bolted. Through the hospital halls, down the stairs, past confused nurses and startled patients. Out through the automatic doors and into the city streets. He ran like he had done it 1,000 times. His paws pounded the pavement. His breath steamed in the cold air. He didn't stop for cars, didn't slow for people. He just ran. Blocks away, inside a loud, crowded gym, Joel was on the floor doing push-ups. His arms burned, his chest heaved. He was trying to exhaust the anger out of himself, but it wasn't working. Then he felt it. A tug on his pants leg. He looked down and saw Bro. The dog stared up at him, eyes intense, panting hard. "Bro?" Joel said, confused. "What the hell?" The dog let go, barked once, then turned towards the door. Joel stood up slowly. "What's going on?" someone asked. But Joel didn't answer. He was already moving, following. He ran after Bro through the city streets, his heart racing with fear. Something was wrong. He could feel it. He pushed through pedestrians, crossed red lights, nearly stumbled more than once. But he didn't stop. When they reached the hospital, Bro leapt through the sliding doors and sprinted down the hallway. Joel followed, out of breath, sweat soaked through his shirt. Nurses looked up, startled, but no one stopped him. Something about the urgency in his face told them to let him pass. He burst into the delivery room just as Katia was wrapping the second baby. Mara was pale, her eyes fluttering. "Where's my wife?" he gasped. "Joel," Katia said, surprised. "She's here. She's okay." He rushed to Mara's side and took her hand. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm here." Mara stirred, her eyes opening slowly. "Joel?" "I'm sorry," he said, kissing her knuckles. "I'm so sorry." She smiled weakly, then looked to the side. The babies were in warming beds side by side. Joel stepped forward, eyes wide. One baby covered in soft, dark hair, the other smooth-skinned and tiny. He stared at them both. "They're perfect," he said, voice cracking. "They're ours." Leandro approached, removing his gloves. "I should tell you," he said. "The hair. It's called neonatal hypertrichosis. It's extremely rare, most likely triggered by a hormonal imbalance during the pregnancy. Could be related to something like minoxidil exposure. Any chance you took that?" Joel blinked. "Minoxidil? For hair growth?" "Yeah. I used it for a few months around the time Mara got pregnant." "That could explain it," Leandro said. "The hormone may have been absorbed by her system, but he's healthy. The hair will fall out in time." Joel looked back at the boy and felt something crack open in his chest, a softness he hadn't felt in years. "It doesn't matter," he said. He turned to Mara, who was watching him with wet eyes. "They're beautiful," she whispered. Bro reappeared in the doorway, panting heavily, his eyes still focused and steady. He didn't come inside. He just sat. Joel looked at him. "You brought me back," he said. He crossed the room, crouched down, and placed his hand gently on Bro's head. "Thank you." Bro closed his eyes. Later that night, as the hospital quieted and the babies slept side by side, Mara rested with Joel beside her. The tension of the past months had melted into silence. Not the kind that divides, the kind that heals. And in the hallway outside, Bro lay curled at the door, his body still, guarding what he had helped bring together. He hadn't barked. He hadn't needed to. He had simply done what he was meant to do, and now the family was whole. The hospital room was quiet, bathed in the soft golden hue of early morning light streaming through the half-closed blinds. Mara lay on the bed, her face pale but peaceful, her body wrapped in exhaustion. Beside her, Joel sat in a chair, one hand wrapped gently around hers, the other resting protectively on the edge of the small bassinet that cradled their newborn son. His hair still had that faint coat of downy fuzz, but he was calm, asleep, his tiny fists clenched near his cheeks. The girl, smaller but just as perfect, slept beside him, her breathing soft and rhythmic. Mara opened her eyes slowly. For a moment, she didn't speak. She simply looked at Joel, then at the two babies, and then beyond him to the doorway, where Bro sat, quiet and still, like a shadow watching over them. Joel turned and followed her gaze. "He never left," he whispered. Mara smiled weakly. "He knew." Joel nodded. "He always knew." There was a pause, heavy with meaning. "I thought I lost you," she said softly. Joel leaned in and kissed her forehead. "You didn't. I got lost for a while. But Bro found me." Mara let out a trembling breath and looked down at their children again. "They're ours," she said, a tear sliding down her cheek. "No matter what." Joel reached across and brushed the tear away. "They're everything." A nurse came in quietly to check Mara's vitals and smiled at the sight of the sleeping babies. "How are we feeling this morning?" "Alive," Mara said. "Lucky," Joel added. "Good," the nurse said. "That's what we like to hear." She hesitated before glancing toward the dog, still sitting at the door. "He's well behaved. I've never seen a dog act like that before." "He's family," Joel said simply. The nurse smiled and nodded. "I'll let the doctor know you're stable. You should be able to go home in a couple of days." When she left, silence returned. Joel shifted in his seat, glancing at the two bassinets again. "You know," he began slowly, "when I first saw him, our boy, I was afraid." "I know," Mara said. "I could see it in your face. But then I realized it wasn't fear of him. It was fear of failing again, letting you down, letting them down." "You won't," she said. "You're already different. We both are." Joel nodded. He glanced back at Bro, who was now lying down, his head resting on his front paws. "I spent years chasing a body I thought would make me better," Joel murmured. "All it did was take things from me, my health, my pride, us. But now you're here," Mara said. "Now we're here." He reached for her hand again, and they sat like that, linked by silence and skin, while the baby slept and the dog watched. Later that day, after the pediatrician gave both twins a clean bill of health, Joel stepped outside to call his parents and give them the news. Mara stayed behind, holding her daughter against her chest, while Bro finally allowed himself to settle at her feet. She looked down at him and whispered, "You saved us." Bro thumped his tail once against the floor. She ran her fingers gently through his fur. "I don't know how, but you knew. You knew exactly when to bark, when to wait, when to bring him back to me." Bro didn't respond. He didn't need to. That evening, Joel returned with a small bouquet of flowers and 2 takeaway coffees. Mara smiled as he walked in. He set the flowers on the side table and handed her a cup. "Not coffee," he said quickly. "Decaf, doctor's orders." She laughed softly. "You remembered?" He leaned over and kissed her forehead. "I remember everything now." By the time night fell, the hospital had quieted. Most of the rooms were dark, only dim lamps glowing from within. Mara had fallen asleep, one baby on her chest, the other in Joel's arms as he rocked gently in the chair. Bro lay curled up near the window, still as stone, his eyes half-lidded but alert. Joel looked over at him. "You don't have to guard us forever, you know," he said. "We're okay now." Bro blinked but didn't move. Joel smiled. "But if you want to, I guess that's okay too." He looked down at the baby in his arms and whispered, "You've got a hell of a big brother." Days later, they returned home. The nursery they had painted in hope was now real, full of sound and warmth and movement. Joel carried both babies into the house and Bro walked beside him like a sentinel coming home from war. That first night, they didn't sleep much. The twins cried and fed and cried again, but every time they looked at them, Mara and Joel both, they smiled, because this noise was proof of life, of love, of something broken now made whole. Weeks passed. The baby's hair began to thin. The condition faded, as the doctor had promised. But Joel never forgot the way he looked that first moment, the shock and the beauty of it. And Bro remained ever watchful. He lay by the cribs at night, his ears twitching with every sound. He sat by Mara's side when she fed them. He walked beside Joel when he took them out in their stroller. People would stop them on the street and say what a beautiful family they were. No one saw the struggle behind their smiles. No one knew the distance they had crossed to get here. But Mara and Joel knew, and when their children were old enough to ask, they would tell them, not just about their birth, but about the dog who waited outside the delivery room. The dog who knew before anyone else that they were ready to become a family. Sometimes family doesn't arrive in the way you expect. Sometimes it waits, and watches, and loves you anyway. What a story. Unexpected, touching, and nothing like we imagined. What do you think truly connects humans and animals? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. More unforgettable stories are coming your way.